inspiring interviews with today's top landlords. This is the Rental Income Podcast. And now, Dan Lane.
If you've been listening to this podcast for long enough, you've probably figured out by now that I love investing in rentals. I think it's the greatest thing in the world. And the reason I think I love rentals so much is that rentals are very forgiving. You can make a lot of mistakes. You can do a lot of things wrong. But if you correct your mistakes and you let enough time go by, things kind of have a way of working out. My guest on the podcast today is a great example of this. He had a really tough time when he was starting out. He made a lot of mistakes. He did a lot of things wrong. He did a lot of things that he definitely would not do today. But he learned from his mistakes, and it actually made him a better investor. So on the podcast today, we're going to find out what he did wrong and what he's doing differently today. Joining us on the podcast today is Jenss Nielsen from Durango, Colorado. We'll take a really quick break. We'll thank our sponsors. We'll come right back and we'll meet Jenss. When I'm doing research to buy a new rental property, there's a lot of different websites, apps, and then a spreadsheet that I use to do my analysis. It's really kind of a convoluted process. Well, there's a much easier way. There's an app called Ask Rick. That's RIC for Rental Income Calculator. Ask Rick makes it really easy to find and analyze rental properties. You can see all the properties for sale in an area. If something looks good, you can press one button. It'll analyze the property for you. It'll figure out the rent amount. It'll figure out your mortgage payment, all your expenses, and give you your cash flow. If you're ready to move forward, you can make an offer right there on the app, or you can send the information over to your realtor to do some more investigation into the property. You can try it out for free right now. Just search for Ask Rick. That's RIC, Ask Rick in the App Store, or go to justascrick.com. That's justascrick.com. The first step in buying a rental property is to get pre-qualified, and I would suggest you work with a lender that specializes in working with investors, because the last thing you want to have happen is to get to closing and find out the money's not there and you can't close. The lender that I recommend is Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. She's a nationwide lender, and she'll pre-qualify you for free if you mention Rental Income Podcast. Find out more today. Contact Chaley at ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE lendinggroup.com. NMLS 42056. All right, so today you're still working full-time, but you've been building out your rental portfolio. How long have you been investing for?
Yeah, it's coming up on about 4 years since I started. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so let's go back 4 years ago and talk about when you first got started, because I think there's a lot that we can learn from that first deal. So you bought an 11-unit building and 2 fourplexes in a pretty short period of time. It was what, like maybe 6 months?
Yeah, that's correct. I bought my first fourplex, close to 4 years ago, after I realized that I wanted to get into real estate investing, and having, looked at other opportunities, and I felt like, the multifamily was the way to go. So we had some savings. We got connected with a broker in a market that we sort of knew, and got that first fourplex, and felt like, hey, this seems like something that could work. And then we bought that, and then shortly thereafter another fourplex in the same area, and then I was like, oh, I need to scale. This is not going quick enough. Mm-hmm. So we had an opportunity to get an 11-unit. It was about 5 or 6 months later in the same area. So we scaled, to 19 units in a very short period of time.
And the area that you're in, that you invested in, was about 4 hours away from you, right? In Albuquerque, New Mexico?
That's right. I live in southwestern Colorado. This is a pretty expensive area. So we decided that Albuquerque, I used to live down there, so I knew that was the closest, largest city that made sense to invest in.
Okay. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. So I want to kind of dive into that and see if we can kind of talk about what went wrong with those properties and kind of what you learned. So the first thing is that's coming to mind is, why did you buy so many properties in such a short period of time? Was it just that it seemed to be working at first, that the properties were going great and you said, well, let's just keep doing it? Or like what made you want to get so aggressive at the beginning?
Because I was 100 committed to becoming a real estate investor, and I had studied it, and I realized, okay, I need to take action. And I felt like I was just taking massive action very quickly. But my own capital was just the way to go, really. So like, hey, let's do this. Let's just plow into it and then see what happens.
That makes sense. Okay. And why Albuquerque? So, or I guess like why 4 hours away? Was there any areas between, any areas closer that you could have invested in, or was that like really the only area that made sense?
It is the closest larger city to where I live. There are some smaller cities closer by, but I felt like the economy was not really one I felt, the long-term outlook for the economy is very energy-based or very small tourism-based and stuff. So I was like, it may work for a while, but it's not diverse enough. So I felt like Albuquerque was a place to go.
Okay.
It has its own challenges, but at least there's 1 million people living there, and it's pretty diverse in terms of economy. So I feel like, hey, that's the one market. I think a lot of investors have a little bit of a limited mindset. It's like, I need to be able to, look over the properties and manage them myself.
Right.
So I kind of did the in between. I didn't jump on a plane to fly to the Midwest. But I also can't go and look at those properties every day if I want to.
So it just makes me wonder, like 4 hours is not something where you can just run over there to check on something. It's far enough away where, that's a serious distance. So like, why not at that point look at something that's halfway across the country?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I really, because I got introduced to some people in Albuquerque through a common connection.
Okay,
and I knew this, I knew the city. I used to live there, so I can save on hotels when I go there. I can stay with my friends. So,
okay, all right,
and just it was just at that time I wasn't ready to make the shift. I thought, a plane ride away was just too much for me to really come to terms with at that time.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, so far, I totally agree with your thinking on everything you did so far. So I'm 100% with you. Now, to drill down to finding an area to invest in Albuquerque is critical. I mean, Albuquerque is a big city, and I'm sure that there's some areas that are better than other areas. How did you figure out where you wanted to be?
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the biggest learning experiences I've had. I'm sure we'll dig into that more. But so the gentleman who I got connected with, who's my broker and property manager, has specialized in kind of the C to C minus areas, because that's what he does. That's what he likes to be in. And he kind of recommended, let's just buy a less expensive property here. I can manage it for you, and we'll rehab it a little bit, and things will probably be fine. At that time, I didn't quite know the impact that the area will have on your returns in the long term. Everything looks great on paper if you can buy a 4-unit for $115,000, right, and maybe put 10 or 20 grand into it.
Yeah.
But there are some things that in the long run you realize that have a bigger impact than the initial purchase price.
Right. Like, what are some of those things?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, the property was, older, built the first one I bought was built in the late 50s, I think. Mm-hmm. So older property. Flat roofs is very common in the Southwest, so roofs are always causing problems because there's no slope. So you have, kind of an outdated layout, maybe some mechanical systems that are a little bit worn and, that need to perhaps being replaced. And if you don't do it day one, you're going to end up having that water heater that breaks,
right,
every so often. And suddenly, $800 or $1,000 on your water heater is going to wipe out your profit for several months.
Okay.
And then, the the tenant class is just a little bit more difficult to deal with at times. A lot of people live, paycheck to paycheck. And if there's any kind of disruption in income, hey, their car breaks down, they lose their job, their rent will be late.
Right.
And so that just managing the tenants, luckily I don't have to do that, but managing the tenants, making sure that your rent get paid and that they take care of your property too. There's just, I've seen people move out and it's like, how could you do $1,000 worth of damage in a year? Right.
Right. Were you doing Section 8 at all, or were these all cash paying tenants?
They were cash paying tenants. We have a few of the housing vouchers, which I guess is a kind of a similar to Section 8. But mostly we're cash paying tenants.
Okay. And so
actually I almost like the Section 8 better because you tend to have better, more reliable payments.
Right. Yep. Okay. So the properties were older. They had a lot of deferred maintenance, and it sounds like you kind of did the minimum up front to get the properties rented out. Like you didn't spend that money into proactively fixing stuff up.
Yeah, actually we did on the first one. We went in there, we put a new roof on just because that's kind of one of the major things that's going to damage your property really quickly if the roof leaks.
Sure.
Put a new roof on there. There were 2 units that were vacant. So we did go in and put, I think, $5,000 or $6,000 per door in to put some new tile flooring in, fixing up the kitchen and stuff. Nothing too crazy, but enough to make it somewhat decent. So, I didn't want to be, a slumlord. I wanted to at least give a reasonable place. We didn't go in and put new water heaters in. We didn't go in and put new heaters in, which may have helped, if we spend that money up front, that may have helped with kind of predictable cash flow along the way, right?
And what was the neighborhood like? Would you say this is like maybe a C- neighborhood or?
At best.
Okay, at best. Okay, so maybe even worse than that.
Yeah, it's very pocketed, right? There's some areas that are pretty nice, nice. They're better than other areas that are a little on the rougher side, right?
Okay.
So, I did feel, again, it's certainly an area that I felt, this is a little rough, but again, why we chose it was because my property manager really managed a lot of units in that area, and he was comfortable. He has the staff to deal with it and everything else, and so you can find those 8 to 10 cap deals there, at least on paper, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think after talking to hundreds of people on the podcast here, you can be really successful in those areas if you know what you're doing. And it sounds like you had a property manager that had a lot of experience in those areas. I mean, if you went in there and tried to self-manage that from 4 hours away, it probably wouldn't have worked out. But having a specialist that really knows that area really gives you a leg up. But it sounds like that didn't even make a difference. Like, right?
I don't want to say it was all bad, right?
Yeah.
It actually did work out quite well the first year or two. And then we just had, just some other challenges around, just things kind of breaking, the water heaters I mentioned.
Okay.
We had a main water line that also broke and, just from an older property.
Yeah.
So I won't say that it was a disaster. Let's say, it was an amazing learning experience and just kind of, hey, this is what property investing really looks like. So now I know something that I didn't know 4 years ago.
What I think is really kind of good too is that it didn't shake you. I mean, having been through a tough experience, a lot of times will make a newer investor not want to keep doing this. It'll turn them off from investing, but it doesn't sound like it had that effect on you, that even though this was a challenge, you continued to buy properties after this.
That's right. And I think, I exactly agree with your point about new investors getting discouraged. And especially when you see people going out and buying, a single family home and they make a couple $100 and it's like, why am I doing this?
Right.
So I realized early on, I either don't do it or I just commit fully to doing it.
Right.
Because otherwise, I don't need a couple $100 extra a month if I have a job. I need enough money to replace my income so I can, go out there and live some other my passions and so forth.
Now, is there anything that you could have done differently to make those properties have been less hassle? Like if you had spent more money up front on the rehab, would that have made a difference? Or do you think it wouldn't have mattered because the tenant quality was rough and they were going to do a lot of damage? And even if you made the place really nice, the tenants are just going to damage it anyway.
I think one of the big lessons is don't try to rehab your property from your cash flow. If you are going to buy something that is older and needs some work, come in there with enough capital up front so you can do the work. Because then otherwise it is that challenge of, every month they're like, oh, somebody moves out, I need to spend $5,000 to fix it up, and my cash flow for the last several months are gone, right? So bring enough capital up front to find a way to bring that money there. Don't try to do a cash flow, because that is the recipe for disaster.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in reality, what I could have done, I did fix up those 2 units when we first bought it. I should probably have replaced the water heaters and any other mechanicals at that time as well. So, hey, it's set for the next 10. It says for the next 10 years. Things are not going to just break randomly on me. That would have been the big thing, right? Right. Now,
why do you think your property manager didn't tell you that stuff up front? Like, it seems like he had been successful in that area, that he was managing a lot of properties. He owned properties in that area. Like, why do you think he didn't maybe tell you some of that?
Maybe I said, oh, I can only spend so much money per unit.
Okay.
Again,
right.
Maybe
Okay.
he felt, oh, this water heater still has a couple of years left, or whatever,
Right.
So,
okay.
I mean, I went and looked at a lot of the deals that he's doing himself, and it is much more of like, hey, let's tear it down to the studs almost and rebuild it, and just have a property that we don't have too many challenges with for the next several years. So.
Yep. Okay. So you had a tough time with those first initial properties, and you've actually sold off the initial duplexes.
Yeah,
right?
the fourplexes. I've sold one,
fourplexes.
and I have on a contract to sell the other one.
So okay. So were they just
that.
too much hassle that you just wanted to move into properties that were going to be less hassle?
Yeah, I felt like my capital, they have appreciated, and I'm not losing any money. I'm making money on them. So they've appreciated, and I felt like I wanted to pull that capital out and put it into property that's going to make more sense and be better cash flowing going forward.
And the 11-unit building, you're keeping that?
I am. So that's also, it's a slightly better area, but actually I felt like that one has some things going for it. It's got a courtyard. We put a gate across it, so it's secure. And we've done most of the units there, and it's actually doing okay. And it's large enough that you spread some of that risk a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
So that's been, it's been a lot of money we put into that one, but I feel confident about that property. I'm looking to refinance it and pull some capital out of that and just let that sit there. It may not make me a whole lot of money, but I feel like but if I can pull out the capital that way, I don't have any money in the deal.
Right.
If it makes me a couple of $1,000s a month, then that's, infinite return.
Right. Yep. All right. So tell me about today. So you have been buying more rental properties over the last few years. Tell me kind of what your criteria looks like. Tell me what you're looking for when you're looking to buy a property today.
Right now, what are we doing? We try to find properties that are in a better neighborhood. If I can find a C-class property in a B neighborhood, is a much better recipe for success. And I bought one personally, like in May last year, a 16-unit. That property, I'm just like, man, this is doing so much better. Just with the area, better tenants. Just acquired a property. And we're trying to improve it. I mean, it's still an older property, but I think we can probably put it up to, a C+, B- quality. And, we've been raising rents and people want to stay there. We have no problems renting them out. So it's like, this is just model of what property investing should be.
Yeah. So is it almost like if you were to compare your spreadsheet analysis on how the property you think it's going to perform, those first properties on paper, did they look a lot better than the properties you're buying today on paper? Like, do the newer properties on paper maybe have a lower return, but in reality they perform better than the first properties?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I wasn't that great at analyzing deals back in the day, so my underwriting has gotten a lot better. But you're right about the early properties looked like they were going to return 15% or something.
Yeah,
but in reality, it's not been the case. Whereas this newer stuff is more like 8. But, so far the experience has been better than
right.
that. So,
okay. So the key to your success, if you were to give anybody some advice on what to invest in, you want to be in a good neighborhood. You want to do the rehab up front, and then you want to try to get better quality tenants. Like those are kind of like the 3 things. Is there anything else that you would advise an investor to look for?
Yeah, be in a neighborhood where it's not all multifamily. It's there's a mix of different property types. That it has some sort of attraction. The later one we purchased is a mile away from a university, and it's got some coffee shops and other things that are really relatively close by. It's on a quiet residential street. So some of those things, if you go in there, is this a place you would find yourself at night and be comfortable walking around? Just things, think about it from your own standpoint. You may not want to live there because maybe the size is not what you want and so forth, but at least feel fairly comfortable with the neighborhood and the tenants and so forth, right? Because if it is too shady, if it is too scary at night, then your tenants are, as soon as they, get better pay, whatever, they're going to move to a different area.
That makes a lot of sense. If anybody wants to reach out to Jenss or maybe talk to him about investing in one of his deals, I've got his contact information on the website. You can find it at rentalincomepodcast.com/episode 261. I'd like to thank today's sponsor for making this episode possible. It's Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. Chaley is a nationwide lender, and she specializes in helping investors buy rental properties. She has a ton of different loan programs, and she can find something that'll work for you in your situation. If you want to find out more or set up a time to talk to Chaley, just go to ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE, lendinggroup.com. If you mention Rental Income Podcast, she will waive all the pre-qualification fees. NMLS 42056. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do that right now, and you'll get notified as soon as new episodes come out. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the Rental Income Podcast.